All right, here we are.
The Anton Stetner Podcast.
Something just came up on the interwebs. Seattle City Council passes a bill to cap late fees for renters to, hold on to it, $10. An enormous fee of $10. What do you think? I'm just curious. Do you think that's too low? Is that too high? I personally think it's ridiculously low.
Ridiculously low. And, so this is under this guise of affordable housing, renter protection. And it's political. It's this battle in politics where they're fighting for votes using buzzwords. Let's break it down, right? Rent. Rent is based on supply and demand. If there's enough rental units, aka supply, prices stay the same. If there's not enough rental units and there's too many people, demand goes up, prices go up. Plain and simple. So Seattle City Council says, you know what? Let's create a $10 late fee. Now, this is coming out of COVID too. This is coming out of an eviction moratorium when we already have this huge problem. Evictions are taking 4 times as long, costing 2 to 3 times as much money, and there was nothing the landlords could do about it. So Washington State landlords, they ended up suing Seattle, suing the Attorney General. To be honest, I don't think they're going to win. What is that going to do? Is that going to help them or is it going to hurt tenants? It's going to hurt tenants. Let's break it down for a second. If you're a landlord and you've got an affordable product or just a regular product, but you know that you can only now charge $10 for a late fee, what I'm going to do and what every landlord's going to do is they're going to increase their rents and they're going to get rid of the lower rents. In other words, if I've got affordable units, I'm going to get rid of these affordable units. I'm going to go buy more expensive units because even though the more expensive units have more risk associated with them, if the tenant has too many things that protect them from paying rent and too many outs, well then how do I protect myself? I have to increase the tenant qualifications. One way to do that is higher rents. And then, of course, a whole bunch of other things, maybe larger deposits, longer rental history, which just pinches that affordable stock even more. And the second thing that it does is it's really going to hurt those small landlords. So one thing that I think the average person doesn't understand is small rent landlords make up such a huge portion of landlords inside of the whole United States, not just here in the Seattle metro. So there was a study that said in Seattle, between 2018 and 2022, there were 11,000 11,000 units in large apartment complexes. Between July 2018 and August 2022, developers in the Seattle metro brought 11,000 apartment units to the Seattle metro. Now, those are all large ones controlled by large investors. Small investors are classified as people who own less than 20 units, and usually they actually only own like 1. During that same time period, because of this regulation, because of COVID, because of the eviction moratorium, we lost the same amount, 11,000 units, in the Seattle metro at the same time. And they were all in what is called that middle housing criteria, which was the ADU, the DADU, the person who moved out and they rent their first house as a single family, the person who moves to Colorado, rent that first house, the duplex, the triplex, the fourplex, the sixplex. And would a tenant rather live in an affordable unit managed by a local person that they could talk to, or would they rather live in a 500-unit complex managed by some no-name corporation? Well, and which is going to have more expensive rent? The little dadu in someone's backyard or the 500-unit complex? So what this bill is doing, these are just unintended consequences, is they're attacking that small landlord, attacking small business, forcing in more corporations here into the Seattle metro and everywhere they do stuff like this, and forcing out that small landlord. This scares me because by taking such aggressive action towards a problem in search of getting political votes, getting in the presses, moral outrage. What they're doing is they're hurting the people they're pretending they're trying to protect.
Yeah, the danger of this is they might have good intentions, right? I don't know what they're thinking, But these politicians, the people that are creating these policies and putting these, crazy $10 late fee rules on, are only going to be in office for what? 4, maybe 8, 10 years, depending on the position and the term. These landlords are for life.
Yes.
So you're kicking out people that this is either their profession or this is an investment that they take seriously. It's so easy to have good intentions, right? Short term, but not understand the consequences long term. And it seems like landlords really have the bad end of the stick because of course you want to protect tenant rights, but of course it's the landlords that buy the homes. They're the ones that fix up the broken down house down the street and then turn it into a rental. And even big investment companies, this is what they do. This is their business. Yes. So the more you punish them, the more they're going to go to places where it's more free for them to run their business in an efficient, productive way, which is what everybody wants for any business that they run.
If you just go back to it, if the builders and developers built 11,000 units and we had the same amount essentially leave, all we did was use punitive policies to punish the small landlord, support giant corporations, and drive out affordable rental units. We're completely failing at that. One of the things, like if people are really interested in this, you should go to the Seattle Times. We'll put a link here in the comments to their article about this. The Seattle Times is a it's a left-leaning newspaper. It's in downtown Seattle. Their subscriber base is downtown Seattle. It's very blue. And when I looked earlier today, there was like 347 comments. Last night, I read all the comments on this story. When your left-leaning subscribers, who are your base, are talking about this is a bad idea, you know it's a bad idea. Please go read the comments. Just do it.
Yeah, the politicians, right? They need to read this. Our leaders in our cities, counties, all the way up to the top.
Governor, state representatives, people in local politics. You need to understand what the local populace is going through instead of making your crusade about your ego and getting on the news.
It's easy to see how people have maybe feel entitled because of all the stimulus, because of all the support they got. Rightfully so. If you shut down the country, shut down these cities, you've got to do things to at least keep some kind of like peace in the streets, progress moving forward, even if it's just like pausing everything. But that can't last forever, right? So you kind of have to. I just don't know how landlords did it during the pandemic, having their tenants not pay and be able to keep up with their payments, especially if you consider most landlords in America, at least for right now or in history, or small landlords, right? Like mom and pa, kind of like, I have a couple rentals, or, in my retirement, I'm just going to buy the house next door because I can afford it with my savings. I'm going to rent it out. But you're going to squeeze them.
You're squeezing them.
Yeah.
And during COVID, the problem was most exasperated in downtown Seattle, in the heart of the metro. Outside of the metro, we personally didn't have any people who didn't pay. We had a couple people get behind and things like that. We worked things out with them. We talked to a lot of the local property management companies. That was not outside of the norm. So it was really interesting how the eviction problem was actually just concentrated in Seattle. And so it's like city council there in Seattle over-exasperated those issues and basically empowered the people to not pay. So next, Inslee.
Yeah, this is a good segue. Inslee wants Washington to borrow $4 billion to build housing and shelter because obviously we don't have enough housing and it's very unaffordable, which they are partly causing.
They're 100% causing this problem. Inslee proposes $4 billion for affordable housing and homelessness. And it sounds like a big number, but they have to increase our state debt limit While the rest of the country during the best economic times ever was running a surplus, Washington went negative, collecting all that tax revenue. So right now, one, we have a history of just overspending. Two, let's just think about this from a logical perspective. Do you want the government to go spend $4 billion on housing? Or would you rather incentivize the private sector to go spend $4 billion on housing?
Definitely. It goes back to my first comment about politicians aren't in the business of creating rentals, right? Well, they're definitely not in the business of building houses. So why would you leave it to them to make that decision? Because there's people that have been doing it for decades upon decades, and they're not worried about policies or getting voted in. They just want to make a profit.
Yep. And all you have to do is dig into this. So Washington right now has about 25,000 people experiencing homelessness. So let's just do some simple math. 4 billion divided by 25,000. Let's just say they want to bring in 25,000 units to help with this homelessness. The problem is our area is so expensive that results in 160,000 a unit.
Crazy.
4 billion divided by 25,000 units. Okay. You can't buy the dirt in our area for 160,000 a unit. Apartment units delivered, turnkey finished, are between 325,000 to 450,000 a unit. So right out of the get, his plan lacks substance. It lacks the ability to even be accomplished. And so, well, how would you do this? Tax credits, incentives to promote this. Take office buildings, because office is getting hammered right now.
Especially in downtown.
Seattle's bad. San Francisco's worse. Okay, but ours is not as good. Ours is just as bad as other parts of the country. So what if we did some office conversions? What if we did some hotel conversions? There are ways to solve this problem other than, hey, let's give the government a giant bag of money all at once that they have to go raise, and they have to raise our debt ceiling. This was doomed from the beginning.
We know that taking on debt from the government level causes inflation.
Yep.
It pushes it out towards, one, the taxpayers, and two, it inflates the price of things that they touch, right? In this case, real estate.
100%. I mean, all you have to do is look at the COVID stimulus money. They turned on the money printers, and then the price of everything went up.
On the same topic of the government and real estate, Washington Senate passes missing middle bill to increase housing density. House Bill 1110 is one of several proposals this year to intend to ease an affordability crisis across Washington due to a statewide shortage, specifically of homes.
Yep. So this is the first time ever in our legislature that we've had over 50 housing bills get introduced, because we are in an affordability crisis. That's also caused by the government. We'll get to that part later. The middle housing bill, this one specifically, what they're trying to do, it originally started out very strong. We're going to get rid of single-family zoning. We're going to allow duplexes in single-family zoning. And then on a duplex lot, we're going to allow a fourplex. And then within a mile of transit, we're going to allow, a half mile of transit, we're going to allow a sixplex. Of course, the second that gets moving, it got neutered and just cut down immediately. Major pushback from cities, Issaquah, Mercer Island, that just say, hey, this doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work with your constituents, and they're pushing back. This is a classic example of the NIMBY. Not in my backyard. I already live here. I don't want a duplex down the street. So it got scrunched down. And originally it was all cities. With this newest iteration, now cities over 75,000 are going to have to allow duplexes on single family lots, fourplexes, and then sixplexes within a certain distance of transit. Also, the cities right around the general Seattle metro are going to have to allow that upzoning. All of this is good, but it's not going to impact housing as much as people think. So a lot of this happens in a land development term as an infill project. In other words, there's one little lot that's left there in a neighborhood. You're going to go put something on that structure, or you're going to tear down an existing property in order to build one. So it's not making a major impact because you're not building whole subdivisions of this at a time. Number two, so far it's giving too much leeway to the cities and the counties in regards to implementation. There should be a deadline in here by which they have to implement. There should be a consequence by which they have to implement. And they should also have a deadline or a timeline by which that permitting process has to be executed. We were just talking with one of our investors about one of their projects that they're going through right now, and both of us, we know who they are. And their project is being delayed simply because the county is not there. They're still working from home, and there's no urgency for them to deliver the project on time. So they're already at a 4-week delay, possibly heading into 6 weeks. Well, that's time and money. Do you think the developer and the builder pay that, or they just pass it straight on to the consumer? The consumer gets hit with that. So I love the idea of this affordable housing, but it doesn't have teeth. And even though they say this may deliver 1 million units, I bet money this might deliver 100,000 units, maybe 200,000, which won't even be a drop in the bucket for the number of units that's needed here throughout the Seattle metro.
Some of the people that pass these bills, if they just spent a little bit of time talking to builders and investors who are in development, they would realize on top of policies like eviction moratoriums and causing investors and builders to consider like, hey, I'm going to have to save up more. I'm going to have to get the type of tenant that isn't going to, like take advantage of that. The $10 late fee, all that kind of stacks up on top of the fact that even though we're past COVID and the shutdown, there's still supply chain issues. The supplies are costing a lot more. And I always ask you this, why aren't builders just building more houses? Well, they would if they could afford it. But
Bingo.
It's too hard to predict. I mean, we know projects.
Or it's too slow.
We know projects that literally can take 2-3 times the amount of time it took previous to COVID. So when you add up all those things, how is it that the professionals who do this for a living, maybe have been doing this, for decades, it's their family business. Yeah. How is it that the government can outdo what they do for a living? They can't. And that's what's interesting about even some of these bills and the intentions that they have, though they might be good in their initial instinct, not logical when you just think about the people who have been doing this and are dealing with it and what we hear from people all the time. Of course, this is one thing about capitalism. I know this going off on a tangent.
I love it.
The reason capitalism and supporting entrepreneurs is so important is because the pursuit of profit is like the great equalizer. And so if you're going to offer a better value, right, a better product, you're going to make the profit. If not, you're not going to be in business very long. So just get out of the way. Just let them do their thing. So when you do things to kind of like
incentivize them to do their thing.
Incentivize them for sure. So you don't want to take control. And I think this goes back to what I said about landlords don't really get a lot of support. They're not the victims here at all, right? It's the other people that aren't able. But it's this vicious cycle, right? You punish the landlords, you're punishing the potential buyers and tenants just the same.
Here in the Seattle metro, our attitude towards landlords that provide housing and builders and developers is they are evil, mean, nasty people, scum of the earth. To be honest, everyone I know in that business is a really hardworking, down-to-earth, easygoing person. Okay, now, of course, there's always some crazy vultures or really mean people, but they're outliers.
BlackRock.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I don't know them at all. You just see all the headlines around BlackRock.
Yeah. Well, it's because, that's so we can attach a name to the boogeyman. But to change this, to make it better, we have to start supporting that. So, if you're going to pass a bill on housing, and this middle housing one, for example, what if everyone that wrote the bill had to go get their own permit or went and submitted a subdivision application and actually worked through the process? What if they went in and talked with the person at the county and then went and talked with a builder, talked with a developer, talked with an engineer, talked with an architect, and got that feedback instead of simply writing something that they thought? Because my fear is that we are killing the American dream because we've made just permitting your own house and building your own house so hard and so unaffordable in our area. That breaks my heart. I get calls all the time on subdivisions, on building permits, where someone says, how do I do this? What's happening here? How do we fix this? And I have to help them through the process. A local CrossFit gym over here, he's been in operation, in Lake Stevens, right there, but he's actually in Snohomish County, in the R5 zone since 2012. Last week, he got a cease and desist that his business is operating in the wrong zone. What happened to the other 10 plus years that he had already been in operation? Stuff like that shouldn't happen. If that business has been there in operation, regardless of the zone, and if it's serving the community, hey, do we want our community to be healthy, happy, fit people, not on prescription drugs, not depressed? Maybe they should work out. Maybe we should support a business that does that. Anyway, we spoke, and I plugged him into the right people to help solve that problem. Don't know if that problem is solvable, but that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against a system that just simply wants to check a box and enforce a rule, not create rewards for winning or for creating housing or for creating business. I mean, it's bad right now.
Yeah, it's definitely bad. I was at a dinner once not too long ago, and these are people from outside of the state, but also people in the Seattle area. It was like a creator lunch, and every one of them talked about how their housing was unaffordable. This is both renters and people buying a home, right? They just, if they're renting, it's always going up. It's just like crazy exponentially growing every single year. If they're buying, and they bought in the last couple of years, it's just like ridiculous. And it's interesting, the tension of this conversation at what was supposed to be a really nice lunch caused so much stress because it is the number one cost. So this whole affordable housing issue is very important.
Huge.
It's just the people making the decisions that affect it the most aren't in that business. And it's a good point what you made about just the process of getting a permit is so difficult for builders and developers that it's slowing them down from actually helping these policies.
Yeah. To go back to what you were just saying, we have a homelessness problem. We have an affordability problem. I want to solve those problems. I want bipartisan support, and I want rich, poor, the middle, everyone to support that problem. I think people need an amazing place to live that's clean, that provides their needs, and is an area they want to be in. Because part of this affordability thing is it forces people into certain areas. It maybe forces them out of downtown Seattle. And this affordability problem is very curable because we have specific policies that are causing this. This specific policy that's causing this is the Growth Management Act, and the fact that we did not expand our urban growth boundaries to allow more buildable land in. And now they're forcing that out to an even longer time frame so they won't evaluate again because the government believes that the buildable lands inventory is enough. The buildable lands inventory is not enough because otherwise, housing prices and rents wouldn't be shooting up so much. You want to relieve this problem? Simply expand the urban growth boundaries a little bit in each one of these cities. Fast track some apartments, some single families. I'm not talking luxury homes. I'm talking, a 900 square foot, 2-bed, 2-bath, single family home and some nice apartments. Fast track some of that and give it to the bottom. Maybe it's some tax credits or something of that nature, and you're going to start to solve this affordability thing. But when we pinch everything because they got to pay for light rail, Puget Sound Regional Council, got to pay for light rail. So we got to pinch everything. Didn't allow the expansion, and we don't want stuff built in the rural environment. Well, that forces this density and higher costs and higher prices. That energy code, and it's just plain bureaucracy, in other words, how slow the process is, and then the cost of the process. If there was more buildable land, supply, price, go down. Simple economics.
On that note about being affordable, I think this is a good time to talk about, I know we're talking about rents, right?
Yep.
But rents are directly correlated to the cost of housing, right?
Yep.
And the cost of housing is going to be dominated by interest rates.
How are interest rates currently affecting the housing market?
Okay, cool. And since interest rates affect the housing market, how is it affecting the current market right now? And where is the interest rates at currently?
Interest rate for the average home buyer yesterday was like 6.75. So I mean, here's what we've seen. We've seen that the market over 7%, the wheels come off and the thing breaks. Below 7%, it keeps moving. In the upper sixes, it kind of slows down. As it approaches 5%, it lights on fire. Demand is high right now because supply is so low. And we talked about this previously, but we've got these interest rate lock-ins, these sellers who they've got a phenomenal interest rate, so they're not going to sell their home and move up. We have builders and developers. The developers have stopped or slowed down their developments. The builders have slowed down their permit applications. I spoke with Chicago Title yesterday about building permits here in Snohomish County. Building permits are 30% of what they were last year right now. This is a major problem. A building permit is our supply in somewhere between 9 to 12 months. Maybe a little longer, but that's future supply. So if development applications are down, building permits are down, it means we have a future supply problem coming. So the Fed, when they raised interest rates super fast, they broke housing. And fundamentally here on a local level, and local throughout all of the country, our local governments in the state, county, and city levels are going to have to get together, and they're going to have to shove through more housing faster and allow that to happen in order to keep civil unrest in control, in order to keep a strong middle class, in order to keep the housing market moving. We haven't even started talking about commercial. Commercial, that's a whole nother story. That one's totally beat up. But that's what happens is basically the market breaks apart in these higher interest rates. What do we think is going to happen? It still looks like interest rates are going to continue to slowly trend down towards the latter part of this year and the beginning of next year. It looks like we've hit in the Seattle metro base level demand, okay? Appears to be the same way throughout the rest of the U.S. too. Prices have stabilized and they've started trending back up. Well, what's that mean? Well, it means we've eventually hit the bottom here and everywhere from here is up. Okay, well, what do we need? Housing supply in an affordable price like we've just been talking about.
Crazy. I don't think the Fed is going to lower rates because of inflation. I mean, the Federal Reserve, one of their, hallmarks is to fight inflation, keep prices steady.
Yep.
And so I think we're still at 5% right now.
Yep.
Unless that dramatically goes down. But I guess that's kind of like why the interest rate is a sweet spot at 5%, right? It'll be interesting to see what happens the rest of this year. Say you're somebody that wants to get into development or just build houses because we have this affordable housing. What is affecting it more? High interest rates or the permitting being so challenging?
Yeah.
Or is it something else? Now, obviously, it could be all above. I was curious which one is affecting it the most and why.
Wow. That's a good question. I would say the high interest rates are affecting it the most because that caused the slowdown in the total number of transactions. As housing became less affordable, that slowdown in the total number of transactions causes builders and developers to get conservative. So they pull back. They submit less permits. They submit less development applications. They increase their margins in order to be able to get there. And don't get me wrong, builders and developers right now across the whole U.S. are actually making up a larger percentage of the market than they normally do. So builders and developers are actually probably cleaning house. Are they more conservative? Absolutely. Are they going to go for longer time horizons on development applications? Yes. Are they going to try to get on a per lot basis at a lower price? Yes. So timelines aren't as bad as just the sheer affordability factor. The timelines, that's just icing on the cake, and that just exasperates that issue.
So Feds Williams says inflation's still too high. Fed will act to lower it. Federal Reserve Bank of New York President John Williams said Wednesday that inflation is still at at problematic levels and the U.S. Central Bank will act to lower it. In comments that noted recent stress in the banking sector will likely weigh on economic activity. Inflation is still too high. We will use our monetary policies tools to restore price stability, Williams said in a speech.
So crazy. So he comes out, he's kind of hawkish, and he just drops the hammer on us. The reality is the market is already betting that the Fed funds rate is going to have to come down. And the Fed needs people to believe they're going to be stronger. So they come out with their words, and then they just give us the strong language because they only have two things: their words and the actual monetary policy. So they're using their words here to try to control the narrative. Then Bullard, right before that, he said the same thing. He said, hey, we're not so much in a recession, and he favors more rate hikes. So you had two people in the last 2 weeks come out from the Federal Reserve and basically stand on a soapbox and say, we're not done, we're going higher, we're going longer, be prepared for the bumpy ride. Because the stock market and the bond market has already started betting against them. So right now, the market is predicting there is a 88% chance of a rate hike in May and a 22% chance of a hike in June on the 14th. The Federal Reserve, I believe, has to give us that hike in May, okay? Like we've been talking about for a while, I believe it's going to be 25 basis points, and then I believe we pause. The market's also saying the same thing. They're saying they're going to pause. So as that starts to cool down, the Fed then comes out and reignites the fire with their words, because they're forcing us to get back to that 2% inflation rate. They're doing everything they can to make that happen. The market can't get too excited too soon. So they come in and they throw gas on, or they throw water on our fire, and they're like, hey, put that out. Another interesting thing, when you look at the Fed's beige book about the U.S. economy, they're saying the U.S. economy has stalled and that credit is narrowing. And this is what we talked about, last time. That credit pinch is getting real, and it's going to become more and more real if you just simply follow it down the pipeline. A bank has to have more reserves, so they're holding more deposits, which means they have less money to lend. And when someone goes and asks for a loan, they're going to give them higher criteria, higher down payments, lower loan to values, more reserves, things of that nature. This is going to hit the commercial real estate sector and small business harder than the home buyer and home seller. But it does also hit the U.S. consumer. So the U.S. consumer feels it in their credit cards and pinched in their lines of credit. And then when they want to go buy a new car, all of a sudden Ally Financial in the background is maybe not giving out as much money. So that's how the U.S. consumer feels it. So this credit tightening has been quoted as possibly being as much as a 50 to a 100 basis point hike from the Federal Reserve, even though they didn't have to do it because of just the natural liquidity drying up in the system.
Wow, so much psychology at play when it comes to the Federal Reserve. My question is more proactively for the investor, right?
Yeah.
For somebody that wants to buy a rental. At what point is it not productive to worry about interest rates, and how do you time it, or do you not time it?
Who cares?
What do people do if they want to buy a rental property right now? Is it a good time to buy?
Well, I don't know that it's a question of like when is the right time to buy. I think people get really wrapped up in that. We get really wrapped up in the interest rate and in the price of things. We need to look at the total deal. Is this a deal that supports my goals, moves me and my family in the direction that I'm trying to go, and can I afford it? Do I have prudent reserves in the bank? Cautiously optimistic. That's what we need to be right now. You need to be optimistic about the future, but yet cautious. In our area, prices are going up. So if I wait, I'm going to pay more later. But wait, interest rates suck. They do. So you have to find a deal that can balance out that price, the appreciation, the cash flow, and whatever it may be. I don't want you to take a risk. I want you to make a calculated decision and then move forward. But don't pause and do nothing. The avid investor is always investing. I love this idea from the stock market of dollar cost averaging. Same thing applies to real estate. Dollar cost your real estate. Just keep buying. Don't stop. And sustained over a long period of time, you will look like a genius and you will make a fortune. Instead, what people do is they respond to their emotions. They respond to their fear. They respond to their coworker who doesn't own any properties. Oh no, the sky is falling. You shouldn't do it right now. You need to do X. Well, when someone does that, look at their track record. How many properties do they own? Where is that knowledge coming from? And if they're not, if they don't own 20 properties, maybe go find the person that does. Like, I think right now, maybe a different way to look at this is the market to go find mentors, coaches, not the YouTube coach, not the Instagram, TikTok coach who says, I just did this now. I want the coach who's been doing this for a decade, even if they're not as flashy as them. I want the guy or the gal who's got the track record. I'm going to go do what the track record says, not the get rich quick scheme.
Yeah, the great thing about dollar cost averaging in real estate is in times like this, you have to pay attention to the numbers. You should always, right? 100%. But right now it's even more important. Yes. Maybe put a little bit more down. Understand this is going to be a higher rate. But then when times are good, maybe if prices do go down, because it happens, right? Yep. Up and down. Usually it just keeps going up. Then you are offsetting for any of the negatives of buying it today. Yep. And that's why some of the most successful real estate investors, you would never know it because they didn't buy like 10 properties in 1 year and post it on Facebook. They bought one property every other year for 20, 30 years. And then they own 100 rentals, at the end of their life that they can now hand off to their kids. And what's crazy about that, in 30 years, oftentimes, you pay off some houses, right? So it's like, it doesn't matter what the market. And so those early houses help to shelter the what ifs of later buys. And that's why it's so important, which is hard to like really wrap your brain around if you're trying to buy your first house, right? Yes. Or your first rental. But consider that because ultimately this is the last thing I'd say. And I want you to kind of like push back on me. Ultimately, what's going to happen is if demand is really high and supply is down, eventually what's going to happen is people are going to start saving up money. They're going to be like, hey, there's some demand here. I need to create supply. So even with the headaches of permitting and issues around being a landlord and the policies going against it, there will be people like, I need to build houses. I need to flip this house into a rental. And it's going to happen. And so that's why...
That's the opportunity.
Exactly. So rather than being fearful about the timing, look for the opportunities because there's going to be more arguably now in the next few years than the last 10 years because other people are just completely checked out.
When times are good, it makes you look smarter than you are. When times are bad, this is when we make the money. The actual wealth is made now. We get commas and zeros in markets like this. And it doesn't show up immediately because you got to lean into the wind. You got to dig in and you just have to push forward. You've got to figure out your model and just work the model consistently over a long period of time. And you're absolutely correct, man. That the negatives we just talked about is creating massive opportunity. And the wannabe investors are going away, and the people who are willing to put in the hard work and solve the problems are going to get all the opportunities over the next 2 years. The next 2 years is going to be the best investing opportunity since 2008, 9, and 10. Period. End of discussion. Please take advantage of some of it. Don't be reckless, but create opportunity for the future that you want. Build it today.
Boom.
That was good.